most people are in what Dan Sullivan calls the gap. When you're in the gap, is all you focus on is what's negative. You focus on what's not right. You focus on what's not there. And this is why most people are unhappy.
And the main reason is mainstream media. That's why you can stay in these places of always negative, always depressed, the world's not good enough, something really beautiful happens to you, but you go right to that place where you're living in the negativity or the gap.
There's a lot of research. I've studied this from a few different perspectives. One of them is obviously hope. So there's a lot of research that shows that the type of material or information you consume determines your level of hope in the future. And I think that it's obvious that the mainstream media's main goal, like mainstream news and stuff like that, is to kill your hope. They want you to feel like you're powerless towards the future, feel like the future is negative.
Let me ask you something. Why do you think that is? I mean, why do you think that people who have such power over the narrative would not want us to feel hope in a future? Like I've thought about that on a pretty regular basis.
I think that most people who create mainstream media know that, we are sensationalized by negative news, and so in a lot of ways, the people who are probably doing the news are just trying to be successful in their career, and the more successful you are, the, you've got to get page views and things like that. And so human beings like negative media. Obviously, there's agendas that go higher and higher.
Yeah.
As far as political agendas, there's obviously strong political agendas in media, but I think on an individual level, I think that the people have probably bought into the narrative that, the future is going to be bleak.
Yeah, well, it's probably kind of the same thing as we like to watch the train wreck or the car crash, like we slow down.
Totally.
So as humans,
It's our emotional brain.
It's our emotional brain. So do you have some pointers or tips on how something usable that people can just put into place to stop that behavior?
Yeah, well,
not just the mainstream media behavior, but the negative part.
Well, there's two quick thoughts that I think you really need to understand about your brain. And then, we'll go into all of the tips. But one is a concept called prospection. Prospection is an idea in psychology that basically says that as human beings, our view of our future determines who we are in the present. So if I have a negative view towards the future, how do you think I'm going to act in the present? I'm probably not going to be that motivated. I'm probably not going to be purposeful and useful on my time in my day. If I have a very clear, specific, exciting, compelling future, I'm going to have a lot of motivation. I'm going to learn a lot. I'm going to be more adaptive. And so whatever view you have towards your own future determines how you feel about yourself right now and also what you do in the present. And so what obviously determines our view of the future? A few things. One of them is your input. There's a great quote from Zig Ziglar. He said, your input determines your outlook, and your outlook determines your performance. And so we're always consuming information, experiences, people. And so your input determines your view of your own future. And your view of your future from a prospection perspective determines your identity, your behavior, your mindset, your motivation. And so just one last thought on this is they've really studied the difference between people who have huge hope. They call it high hope people versus low hope people. And people with high hope and by the way, when you have high hope, you've got specific goals, you're adaptive, you're always learning, you're not just doing the same thing over and over, but also you don't try to find reasons to not have hope. Whereas low hope people, they don't have specific goals, they avoid accountability, but also they consume media that gives them reasons to not have hope. They want media that basically justifies them not having to do anything. So I think that those are some good groundworks before we go into some specifics, but you really want to have hope towards your future. It's essential. If you don't have hope, then you're going to be depressed in the present. You're going to have, that's one of the main things that Viktor Frankl found in Man's Search for Meaning. If you don't have hope, you fall apart.
Yeah, and I think that when you meet people who have part hope in the future and they have big dreams and big goals, but then they fall into that little negative, we had a conversation with a very dear friend last night, and basically he's an amazing human. He's got an incredible business and he's got all these goals and visions, but he drops right into the gap when you talk about it. That is really common, right? Because it's almost like a combination of the two, not just someone who consumes all this negative information and lives in that place, or people who consume different information and live in a place of hope and gain always.
Yep.
But there's a person I think majority of people live between, where it's like they have all these aspirations, they consume some good stuff, but they let that other stuff take them right into the gap.
Totally. Yeah, just so everyone knows what we're talking about. So Dan Sullivan, he's the number one entrepreneurial coach in the world. He's got a company called Strategic Coach, but he's got a concept he came out with 20 years ago called the gap and the gain. And basically what the gap and the gain is if you're in the gap, you're comparing yourself against some ideal that doesn't exist. We all have ideals, and even when you move forward and if you achieve goals, your ideals are constantly moving. So it's a moving target. And so if you're comparing yourself constantly against your ideal, you're in the gap. And if you're in the gap, it doesn't matter how successful you are or how good you are at what you're doing. is all you see is what's missing. So for example, we were at a friend's restaurant last night, and we were just complimenting the heck out of his food because it's some of the best food we've ever had. And he would say, yeah, but it's just not quite good enough. Or yeah, but I'm not being that great in my life. I'm like, why do you keep going into the gap? We're trying to just, and so the gain, on the other hand, from what Dan says, is rather than comparing yourself against your ideal, you actually compare yourself against your former self, against where you were before. So I said, I'm not going to say his name, but I just said, did you make any progress in your life and in your business since last year? Like, have there been any gains personally or professionally? He's like, oh yeah. And he just started listing like, oh, I moved out of my mom's house for the first time, got my own house. Like, he's done all these amazing things in his business. And it's like, that's where you need to focus. So people go into the gap all the time. And if you're in the gap, you can't be happy. Because even if you're successful, you don't feel it. And you can be in the gap with other people. I can be in the gap with my kids. I can always just focus on the few things that aren't right about them compared to my own ideal. Or I can actually look at them and appreciate, holy cow, look at how much progress you've made in the last 6 months. Like you've gotten so good at tennis, or like you're reading better, or you're more emotionally calm in the morning. Like if you focus on the gains, then not only do you appreciate people more, but you feel better. You train yourself. And so the gap and the gain is really just your view of the world. But I think that mainstream media teaches people how to be in the gap. We're always complaining. We're always bothered about this problem and that problem, this problem, that problem. And if you're always in the gap about everything, you're probably in the gap about yourself. You're in the gap about other people. You're in the gap about the economy. You're in the gap about the leadership. If you're always in the gap, then you're just a complainer. And that's going to obviously impact your view of the future, but it's also going to impact your biology. It's going to impact everything.
Everything. In fact, I think the biggest thing is it just takes practice.
Yeah, you got to train yourself.
You have to realize that you're doing it. When that happens, when you catch yourself in those places, it's a little bit hard in the beginning, but then it just becomes habit. Just like it becomes habit to get into the negative, it becomes habit to get into the positive.
Yeah, so in psychology, there's a concept called selective attention. Basically, there's a million things out in the world that we can see, but we selectively focus on those things that are meaningful to us, and so you have to train your brain. You have to train your selective attention. You do that by, consciously putting in the right material into your brain, consciously being around the right types of people, pursuing meaningful goals, writing about your goals regularly, and then actually shielding yourself from getting distracted. Because whatever you let in your brain, that's going to shape your vision. That's going to shape your worldview. That's going to shape your even desires. So the stuff we put in, it shapes how we see it, shapes what we want. And so you need to be very thoughtful that the things you let into your head are going to influence your identity, your worldview, your goals, your desires, how you feel.
Yeah.
And so you have to just know that there's some things that are not worth, there's some things that are just, the juice is not worth the squeeze. With mainstream media, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It's actually literally limiting your future, because when you watch it, your view of your future drops. And when your view of your future drops, your motivation, your identity, your confidence in the present completely shrinks. And so you have to be really aware that anything that comes in, garbage out. If you want to become a garbage identity with a garbage mindset, garbage behavior, and a small future, then keep watching mainstream media. And also, but it's like you have to be that aware that anything that comes in shapes how you see. And so you want to replace junk media with good media, stuff that helps you achieve your goals.
Well, it's about breaking out of old habits, because I'll tell you, during right after 9/11, my oldest son, who was in the Utah National Guard, got activated into full-time active duty in the military, and he went over to Kuwait and Iraq. And I spent the entire year that he was there consuming mainstream media.
You did?
The entire year.
Why?
Because I wanted to know what was going on in the world during a war, because my son was there.
Oh.
And it
didn't really help, right?
Oh, it was actually one of the worst years of my life, because I was always on edge. All day long I consumed talk radio and media. And when he got home, I made a decision that I wasn't going to watch mainstream media anymore. And it's been more than 20 years, and I haven't watched any. I don't watch it.
It doesn't mean you're not informed. You can be very informed.
You can totally be informed. But here's the thing, too. What I've found myself doing, because social media has turned into that, where you scroll and you read stuff and you read comments, and I feel worse about life and
There's
the future.
A lot of research that shows that more time you spend on social media, the more depressed you are.
Yes.
Because think about it.
It's not new.
It's the bell curve. In society, there's always bell curves, and most people are in the middle. And obviously, most people in the middle kind of have a herd mentality. And so they're being kind of, driven by mainstream media. There's outliers, obviously, who consume their own narrative, or they control their own narrative. They also control their own worldview. Like, you have to realize nothing is objective. There, from a psychology standpoint, there's no such thing as an objective reality. We all see the world subjectively. So, like, if I, even this is my Aunt Jane. Like, how I see my Aunt Jane is subjectively different from how you see her. You might just see her as someone on YouTube, So, like, we all see things differently. We all create different meanings for everything, for people, for events, for places. And so you want to train your own subjective worldview to be what's useful, what's helpful, what's positive, towards what makes you more happy and more successful, versus training your worldview to have a negative view of yourself, a negative view of other people, to always be in the gap about life. So I guess here's a few practical things, how I think about it. One is when you have 5 minutes of free time, which we all have a million of those blocks a day. When you have 5 minutes of free time, what's the first thing you do? Most people, they have developed the habit of just reverting straight to media, mostly social media. But you want to replace that 5 minutes of wasted time with some, right, rather than consuming, just go outside, like go for a walk. The more time you leave your phone on airplane mode, the better, because you actually want to be in a flow state more often. And if you're in a flow state, you're more present with your loved ones. You're also probably more present towards your work. And if you're more present towards your work, you're going to be more effective, which is going to make you more confident. And the more confident you are, the bigger your view of your future can become. You start to believe that you can do better things in the future. But if you're constantly immediately distracting yourself on social media and you're becoming a consumer, then essentially you're just very reactive. You're also just driving up your need for more and more dopamine to do little tasks. And so if you are constantly like distracting yourself, especially with media that's generally based on the middle of the bell curve, like obviously you can get media that's helpful towards being an outlier and helping you towards being successful. That's what high hope people would do. Most people, though, they're consuming media, even on social media, from people who they don't aspire to be like.
Like just junk.
Yeah, you're just consuming average media made by average people who are in the middle of the bell curve, trying to keep you in the middle of the bell curve, which is basically you're just consuming media from people that you don't aspire to be like. And so that's going to train you into a lower level mindset. The other thing, and this is something that Dan teaches about being in the gap or the gain, is that it's very nice and very useful on a daily basis to actually reflect on what were some of the key wins that happened in the last 24 hours. In the last 24 hours, what were a few of the things that happened that were positive? You're just training your brain to focus on the positive, focusing on what happened. And there's a lot of research from B.J. Fogg at Stanford. B.J. Fogg is one of the top experts on habits. But he said in order to actually develop habits, it's not solely about repetition. It's actually about feeling good. And so you need to feel good about what you're doing in order to want to keep doing more of it.
But sometimes don't you forget? Like people forget, like to actually sit and
Yeah,
have
so
a habit.
so environment design. So create like a little beeper on your phone, like a little reminder that says it's 6 o'clock. Write down 3 things you're grateful for. You know what I mean? Turn it into a forcing function. You want to design your environment so that it's reminding you to be your future self. So if you have a little reminder so you don't forget, eventually it'll become a habit. You can link habits together. They call that habit stacking. So when your day is over, you want to link one behavior. You're probably getting in your car. You're going to get in your car every day because you're going to go drive home from work. But if you have your journal like sitting right on your seat so that when you get in the car, you've got to open your journal, you can link the habits together. As soon as you sit in your car getting ready to leave, you just write down 3 things that went well that day, put it down. It takes 30 seconds, and then you leave. You just stack 2 habits together, but you always want to stack a habit with one that already exists. You don't want to try to stack a habit to some habit that you're trying to build.
Good habits. Yeah. Good habits. Don't stack your bad habits.
Compounding negative habits is what a lot of people do. I mean, they start watching negative media, and then they start getting stressed out, so they start eating potato chips, right? And so their future is just getting smaller and smaller. I mean, one quick last thought on this is that Stephen Covey, one of the things he talked about, it's actually Sean Covey, his son, talked about in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, which we've been reading with our kids and they've been loving, is the idea of that we all have a personal bank account. A personal bank account is your trust of yourself, your integrity, your character, and every behavior you do and every thought you do is either depositing into your personal bank account or withdrawing. And so everything you do either deposits towards your future or withdraws towards your future. Literally every behavior. You eat the candy bar, you're sort of withdrawing towards your future self. It's not like you can't do some forms of, I guess you would call it unhealthy behavior, but everything you do is a deposit or a withdrawal from your personal bank account, and your personal bank account is how you see yourself, and that's also how you see your future. So literally everything you do is either a deposit or a withdrawal from your future self. So if you go and spend that 5 minutes on negative media, you have just limited your future self a little bit. They've just gotten a little bit smaller in your head, and therefore your future smaller, therefore your presence less effective.
Yeah, that's a power message, you guys.
Yeah, it's good stuff, right?
Yeah.
So be wary of the mainstream media, right? Be wary of the stuff you consume, because garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, and you might not think it's garbage. And I've had people...
It is, though.
It is
straight up trash.
There's no other way to put it. Straight up trash. I actually disconnected from Facebook earlier this year, and I don't miss it.
Yeah.
At all. So it takes some unaddicting if that's your mode, and especially like you just said, if you have 5 minutes, what do? You sit and you open up junk.
You immediately start consuming.
Yeah. So
then you're just living reactively and not by design. And that's how you train yourself to just be a reactive person that's not actually proactively designing yourself. You just every 5 minutes you're like, okay, My life's going to be steered by someone else's agenda, by someone else's post. Like, let's just be a random acting person, you know. And there's that whole quote that how you do anything is how you do everything. So if you're living reactive all the time and letting yourself be distracted by random things, your whole life's distracted. You don't have a purpose, you don't have a direction, and obviously that's going to kill your confidence. And so you want to be more intentional about where your brain is and not just send it in random directions and be reactive. You want to be proactive about your life. Know where you're going, know how you're controlling your mind, doing the right behaviors so that you're making more and more deposits towards your future self, building more confidence, being more in flow, being less distracted.
This is
totally your choice.
This is a year to do it.
Yeah, you have to.
This is an important year because the whole world has shifted, and I feel like this is a time when you can really take these tips and flow. You can make your future self can be so much bigger and better and more brilliant than you even can imagine. So stop consuming the junk media. Yeah. Start some of these practices like the gratitude. Look at the things that you do, that you have accomplished, and be in the game.
Be in the game with yourself, with those you love, with the world. The world, if you have a positive view of the world, you're going to approach the world differently. If you think the world's going down, then you're going to just give up on it. So that's the same with your life, and it's also the same with your family. So have a beautiful day.
Thanks, guys.